He was just the delivery guy, until he opened his mouth and spoke 7 languages. That day, the fate of a $500 million deal and his own future changed forever. The morning sun spilled through the subway grates in Queens, streaking the sidewalks in broken light. The cracks in the concrete mirrored the city's rhythm, fast, sharp, unrelenting. Among the shadows and steam, a boy moved like breath between words. Alex Carter was 20 years old, but the weight he carried made him seem older. Not in his posture, which was straight and fast, but in his eyes. Those dark eyes that had seen too much for a boy who once dreamed in 7 languages. In one hand, he held a brown paper bag, the kind that crinkled from heat and the promise of lunch. In the other, his phone buzzed with GPS instructions and delivery app notifications. His faded red hoodie clung to his lean frame, worn at the sleeves and elbows. The drawstrings were frayed, the fabric pilled, but it was his shield against the wind, the world, and the shame of where he'd landed. He wore a delivery backpack slung tightly against his shoulders. It pressed into his spine, every step reminding him he was no longer where he was supposed to be. Alex had once belonged to classrooms and ideas, not alleyways and traffic jams. He had walked through the gates of NYU on a full scholarship, bright-eyed, fluent in English, Spanish, French, Italian, Mandarin, Japanese, and Arabic. Language had always come to him like music comes to a violinist, a natural, living current. His mother used to say, "You hear the soul of words, baby. That's your gift." But the world did not always listen to gifts. His father had died in a quiet corner of a community ESL class, the victim of an unseen heart attack. His mother's health collapsed soon after, decades of cleaning houses and working double shifts catching up to her all at once. Bills started to pile. Hospital visits swallowed savings. His dreams of becoming a United Nations interpreter dissolved into the background noise of survival. So Alex dropped out without a sound. No farewell ceremony, no professor's protest, just silence. Now he delivered food. That morning, his first order was for Hartwell International, a 78-floor steel and glass monument that pierced the Manhattan sky. The kind of building where billion-dollar decisions were made over lattes and legacy. Inside were men in tailored suits talking about global strategy. Outside was a boy in a red hoodie holding a brown bag. Alex approached the front desk with familiar humility, eyes low, voice calm. The receptionist didn't bother to look up. "Delivery for Weller, 45th floor," Alex said, holding up the bag. "Drop it at receiving," the man muttered without breaking focus on his screen. "There's a note, says direct handoff. Look." Alex tapped the app on his phone. The receptionist clicked his tongue, annoyed, then buzzed the gate open with the push of a button. "Freight elevator. Back left." Of course, freight elevator. Not that Alex expected anything else. He moved silently through the lobby, a flash of red among navy suits and beige coats. As the old metal elevator groaned to life, he overheard snippets of conversation, Japanese from a headset, Mandarin from a voicemail, a fast-paced conversation in Spanish near the break room. They slipped into his ears like old friends. He translated them automatically in his mind. He couldn't help it. It was muscle memory now. The 45th floor opened like a different world, marble flooring, glass partitions, walls that shimmered with understated power. The air smelled like citrus and money. The receptionist up here looked like a retired military officer, all jawline and posture. Alex said nothing, just held out the bag. "Delivery's here," the receptionist said into his earpiece. Moments later, a tall woman with sharp lipstick and sharper heels walked over, clipboard in hand. "You're late." Alex blinked. "Apologies, ma'am. The train—" "Just leave it on the table." Alex obeyed, turning away to leave. But then, a sharp ding echoed down the hall. The conference room doors slid open. Out walked Marcus Weller. He was taller than expected, his suit charcoal gray and perfectly pressed, his silver-streaked hair combed with intention. His presence was quiet but commanding, the kind that didn't need volume to be felt. His eyes swept across the hall and landed on Alex. "You there," Marcus said, pointing. "Hold up." Alex froze. Marcus approached, looking down at the bag in Alex's hand. "What's this?" "Lunch order. For your assistant, sir." Marcus opened the bag, peeked inside. "Humph. Last guy always forgot the hot mustard. You got it." Alex didn't smile, just nodded. "It was in the notes." Marcus gave a single curt nod. "What's your name?" "Alex Carter." "What do you do besides delivery?" Alex hesitated. "Mostly this. And take care of my mom." Marcus stared at him for a second longer than necessary, then nodded again, softer this time. "Good son. Not many of those left." And then, just like that, he turned and vanished behind the glass doors. Alex exhaled slowly. As he made his way back toward the elevator, he caught the sound of an argument behind one of the offices. French. A woman's voice sharp with frustration. A man replying in broken English. Something about a clause in a contract. Misunderstood intention. Cultural offense. Possible deal breaker. Alex paused at the sound. He translated it in his head, line by line. He couldn't help it. It was like standing in front of a puzzle and watching the pieces fall into place. He whispered the full meaning to himself in perfect English, his mind dancing between nuance and idiom. And then the elevator doors opened, and he left. But something had shifted. They're not understanding each other, he thought. Not really. And in a tower of glass where words were currency, miscommunication could burn fortunes. That evening, Alex stirred reheated soup in their tiny Queens apartment. His mother lay bundled on the second-hand couch, her face pale, eyes sunken, wrapped in a wool blanket they'd found at Goodwill. Her voice was soft as tissue. "You look tired, sweetheart." "I'm good," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "I met the CEO today." "Of Hartwell?" "Yeah. He talked about mustard." She chuckled, weak but genuine. "Maybe next time you'll teach him to say thank you in 7 languages." Alex smirked, but his thoughts were somewhere else, high up in a boardroom where the powerful spoke in tongues they didn't understand. He wondered how many wars began with mistranslation, how many partnerships died from pride misread, how many Alex Carters were out there, unheard, unseen, speaking 7 languages to walls that only answered in silence. He looked down at the creased letter in his pocket, the one from NYU, the one that still called him brilliant, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed a question to stir. What if, just once, they listened? There was a time when Alex Carter's voice could bring a university auditorium to complete silence. He was only 17 then, one of the youngest in his class at NYU, but he stood out like a prodigy among scholars. During his final presentation for his introductory linguistics seminar, Alex didn't just explain theories in English. He shifted seamlessly into Spanish, then French, followed by Arabic, each language spoken with flawless precision, as if it were his native tongue. Every sentence rang with rhythm and clarity. Every pause was placed with intent. Professor Harrington, a famously critical academic, set down his pen halfway through and simply listened. By the time Alex concluded with a passage recited in classical Japanese, the classroom erupted in applause. Someone whispered, "He's the Mozart of language." That light, however, didn't last long. The following winter, Alex's father passed away quietly after teaching his last ESL class. A silent heart attack, gone before the ambulance arrived. Alex's mother, who had spent years working 2 jobs to keep them afloat, began to deteriorate shortly after. Her health declined, and with it, their financial stability. At least 3 nights a week, Alex skipped dinner to cover medical expenses. He juggled tutoring gigs and late-night dishwashing shifts. Tuition deadlines crept closer, and the financial aid office sent polite but firm reminders. Please remit payment for continued enrollment. Alex read that email under a dim street lamp on his way to a night shift at a car wash. The next morning, he packed his things in silence and walked away from NYU. No farewell post, no tearful goodbyes, no appeal. Just silence. The kind that only those who know sacrifice understand. But Alex never stopped learning. On long subway rides, he listened to Italian podcasts. During delivery breaks, he read international diplomacy memos in French. When his mother finally fell asleep each night, he cracked open Mandarin newspapers on his old laptop. Language, for him, was never a subject. It was breath. It was being. But he stopped speaking out loud. There was no room for brilliance in a red hoodie and delivery bag. No one wanted to hear a food courier explain tonal shifts in Cantonese or syntax anomalies in German. People saw what they expected. A dropout, a nobody, a background character in the story of other people's lives. So Alex chose silence. He lived among overheard conversations, translating them like puzzles, not for glory, but because his brain wouldn't stop. It was like watching a symphony no one else could hear. The morning after his brief encounter with CEO Marcus Weller, Alex returned to Hartwell International for a routine delivery. As he entered the lobby, he caught fragments of conversation from a nearby conference room. A sharp voice barked in German, "Diese Bedingungen sind völlig unfair." Alex translated without blinking. "These conditions are completely unfair." Inside the room, an American manager stammered, trying to respond in English. "We're still reviewing, sir. We just need clarification." Alex lingered near the elevators. His heart beat a little faster. He could feel the tension rising in the room like heat through glass. He could help. He knew it. One sentence, spoken clearly, in the right language, might diffuse the entire misunderstanding. But no one turned to him. And so, once again, he remained invisible. That night, while peeling apples for his mother in their tiny kitchen, she noticed his silence. "You've got that faraway look," she murmured. "I watched people argue today, in a language neither of them really understood." She smiled, faint and knowing. "Maybe they need someone who listens." "I could have helped, Mom. I knew exactly what they meant. But who listens to a delivery guy?" She paused, studying his face. "You know, not everyone has the courage to be quiet. But sometimes, silence isn't strength. It's hiding. And you, baby, were not born to hide." A week later, fate arrived disguised as a diplomatic motorcade. Alex was walking toward Hartwell's glass tower when 5 black cars pulled up at the front. Flags fluttered from their hoods: Japan, China, Brazil, Germany, and France. Inside the building, security tightened. A hush fell over the marble lobby. Alex knew immediately. This was the multinational summit Hartwell had spent months preparing for, a clean energy partnership worth $500 million. But when he reached the 45th floor to deliver an order, the usually composed security guard was panicking into his earpiece. "The interpreter's in the hospital, car accident. We don't have a backup." Alex heard every word, and for the first time in years, he took a step toward the doors that had always been closed to him. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the assistant's panicked eyes. Maybe it was the Mandarin echoing from the conference room down the hall, mistranslated and now sparking offense. Or maybe he was just tired of being silent. "Excuse me," Alex said softly, but clearly. "I think I can help." Outside the towering glass walls of Hartwell International, a line of black sedans slid into position. Flags from 5 nations, Japan, China, Brazil, Germany, and France, fluttered faintly beneath a gray New York sky. Inside the marble-clad lobby, tension thickened like fog. Security radios buzzed. Assistants whispered frantically into phones. Every step echoed like a countdown. Upstairs on the 45th floor, chaos had taken root. Alex Carter wasn't supposed to be up there. His delivery, a tray of vegan wraps and green teas, was meant for the event lounge 1 floor below. But as he stepped out of the service elevator, he heard the voices. And he understood every single one of them. Near the boardroom, Riley Shaw, Chief of Staff to CEO Marcus Weller, stood holding 3 phones. Her normally composed face was etched with rising panic. "Where is she?" she hissed into the nearest phone. A junior assistant rushed up. "Sofia Delgado was in a car accident. She's okay, just a mild concussion, but she won't make it today." Riley froze. "Our interpreter?" The assistant nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Do we have backup?" "The agency says they're rerouting someone from Washington. Earliest ETA, 3 hours. Riley looked like she might strangle the phone. "We don't have 3 hours. The first round of talks starts in 10 minutes. From inside the conference room, a man's voice rose sharply, French, fast, and angry. Though no one near Riley responded, Alex instantly understood the words. "No one told us the reverse licensing includes local operational data. This is unacceptable." A Hartwell representative mumbled something in English, trying to piece together a reply, but it came out clumsy and vague. The French delegate fired back, "You don't understand a single thing, do you?" Before Alex realized what he was doing, he stepped forward and spoke, his voice calm, respectful, and fluent. "The licensing clause is still under internal review," he said in English. "No local data will be transferred without signed approval from all parties." The conversation froze. Riley turned. So did the assistant. And then Marcus Weller himself emerged from the boardroom. "You again," Marcus said, recognizing Alex from the day before. "Hot mustard." Alex gave a faint smile. "Yes, sir." Riley looked between them, stunned. "What is happening right now?" Marcus's eyes didn't move from Alex. "How many languages do you speak?" 7, Alex said quietly. Riley scoffed. "Right." Just then, voices flared again from inside the room, this time in Chinese. Urgent, frustrated. "They're asking about algorithm ownership," Alex said calmly. "They want to know who controls the training data." "What?" Riley blinked. "They think Hartwell is claiming access to their AI infrastructure," Alex explained. "But they're wrong. It's a misunderstanding." "You're sure?" "Yes." Marcus stepped forward. "Say it clearly. Say it the way they'll hear it." Alex nodded, stepped past Riley, and leaned slightly toward the open door. "In plain terms," he said, speaking clearly and directly, The licensing agreement only covers the deployment interface. It does not include algorithm weights or training data. Any cross-border transfers would require encryption and bilateral approval. The tension inside the room eased immediately. One of the delegates nodded. Another whispered to their aide. Slowly, the temperature in the room began to fall. Marcus turned to Riley. "He's hired." "You can't be serious," she said. "He's a delivery guy." "He just prevented 2 walkouts in 60 seconds, Marcus replied. "We're out of options." Minutes later, Alex stood in a temporary war room behind the boardroom, surrounded by a flurry of lawyers and compliance officers. "Have you ever done formal interpreting work?" one asked, arms crossed. "Not officially," Alex said. "I studied linguistics at NYU before I left. I've done community mediation in multiple languages, academic debate, model UN, volunteer work with refugees." "Security clearance?" "No," Alex admitted, "but I'm not here to interpret legal contracts, just to help people understand each other." A compliance officer muttered something about risk, but Marcus cut in. "We're not negotiating clauses right now. We're translating human intention. Let him speak until the certified interpreter arrives." They handed Alex a confidentiality agreement. He signed without hesitation. "You're not here to impress anyone," Riley said, handing him a borrowed navy blazer. It was too big, but it covered the hoodie. "You're here to make sure nobody walks out because they weren't heard." Alex nodded. Marcus stepped close. "This isn't just a corporate deal. This is infrastructure, families, power grids. One bad sentence and 5 years of work burns to ash." Alex looked him in the eye. "Then I'll make every sentence count." The boardroom doors opened. Inside, everything was waiting to unravel. Delegates whispered to each other. One glanced at his watch. Another was drafting a motion to suspend the meeting. Translation headsets sat idle on the table, useless without someone to bridge the silence. Riley entered first. "A provisional interpreter has been appointed. He'll assist until our official arrives." There were groans, raised eyebrows, a few whispers of disbelief. Then Marcus entered with Alex. "This is Alex Carter," Marcus said. "He's here temporarily to ensure communication flows clearly. Legal terms will remain in writing only." A Japanese delegate frowned. "This is your solution?" Alex stepped forward, bowed his head slightly, and addressed the room with steady, heartfelt English. "I know I don't look like what you expected, but I promise you, my role here is not to lead, but to listen. To help each of you hear each other the way you meant to be heard." No arrogance, no theater, just quiet conviction. The room paused, and slowly, one by one, translation headsets clicked on. What followed over the next 45 minutes was nothing short of astonishing. Alex navigated 5 languages, like a symphony conductor moving through movements, sensitive where needed, precise where it mattered. He didn't just translate, he interpreted intent. He softened sharp edges when diplomacy demanded it. He preserved urgency when truth required it. He helped a German economist rephrase a harsh critique into a constructive proposal. He turned a poorly timed Brazilian joke into something that actually landed. He caught a subtle misunderstanding about licensing thresholds that could have torpedoed the session, and gently corrected it. Trust, once fractured, began to mend. Riley sat in the back of the room, arms folded, watching him, at first with skepticism, then with something close to wonder. Marcus. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just watched Alex, the red hoodie kid no one saw coming, bring the room back from the edge. Near the end of the session, one of the Chinese delegates leaned forward and spoke a proverb aloud. It was meant as a challenge, something along the lines of, "Some truths can only be understood, never explained." Alex paused for the briefest moment, then replied, his voice low and even, "Some truths live beyond words, but today, we need words to carry trust. That's what I'm here to do." There was a pause. Then the delegate smiled. When the session broke for recess, murmurs filled the hallway. A German attaché turned to his colleague and said, "He's better than the last three we've had." The Brazilian advisor clapped Alex on the back and laughed. "Where did you come from, kid?" Alex stepped into the hallway alone and gripped the edge of a countertop. His hands were trembling. His lungs felt hollow. But deep inside, one undeniable truth had finally taken shape. He wasn't just capable, he belonged. When Alex Carter stepped back into the boardroom after the recess, the temperature of the room had changed. It wasn't colder. It was quieter. The kind of quiet that only follows impact. The seats had been rearranged slightly, coffee cups replaced, tablets refreshed. But what lingered wasn't caffeine or convenience. It was a sense that something had shifted, and everyone knew it. Across the table, 5 delegations representing 5 nations no longer looked at Alex as a curiosity. Now they watched him as a presence. Not quite a peer. Not yet. But no longer invisible. He moved carefully, his posture straight, his steps deliberate. The blazer Riley had given him still hung awkwardly off one shoulder, the red hoodie peeking out from beneath. It didn't match the custom suits or silk scarves worn by others, but it no longer looked out of place. It looked earned. Marcus Weller stood near the head of the table, arms crossed, scanning the room. When Alex entered, their eyes met. Marcus gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Let's resume," he said. The session restarted with a round of technical clarification, regulatory frameworks, jurisdictional overlaps, language on carbon accountability. Alex moved between tongues like a current between shores, seamless and subtle. But then came the moment that no one had prepared for. One of the German lawyers raised an issue buried deep in Clause 17. Something about environmental liability in joint operations. The French delegation disagreed. The Brazilian envoy raised concerns about precedent. The Chinese team leaned back, stone-faced. Tension began to creep in again. Not the loud kind, but the sharp, dangerous kind that gathers in subtext and glances. The kind that could unravel the day. And then, one voice cut through. Alex. "If I may clarify," he said, eyes scanning each delegation, "the disagreement here isn't legal. It's cultural." That sentence stopped the room cold. No one moved. France is interpreting liability through a preventative lens based on EU environmental law. Brazil is focusing on economic equity. Germany is concerned with legal precedent because of historical litigation. China isn't reacting because in their framework, silence signals discomfort, but also caution. He turned to Marcus. And Hartwell's original wording lacks context for all of that. Marcus tilted his head, intrigued. "Go on." Alex took a breath. "What this clause needs isn't better language. It needs better listening." A full 5 seconds of silence passed. Then one of the Japanese delegates leaned forward, folding his hands. "What do you propose, Mr. Carter?" Alex hesitated, not out of doubt, but because he knew this moment mattered. Everything in him warned, do not overstep, do not lecture, but also do not waste the chance. I propose we allow each delegation 2 minutes to speak, not as negotiators but as people, to say what matters most to their countries in their own voice, without interruption, without translation. The room blinked. No translation? Someone repeated. Alex nodded. No translation at first. Just speak. Let the words live in the air as they were meant. And then I'll interpret them all. Not just word for word, but meaning for meaning. Intention. Spirit. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. Marcus looked around the room. Objections? There were none. What happened next didn't feel like a business meeting. It felt like something older, deeper, like storytelling around a fire. The Japanese delegate spoke first, softly, respectfully, about the weight of responsibility and the fear of technological dependency. His voice trembled slightly toward the end, not from weakness, but from something close to truth. Then came the French representative who spoke not of policy, but of grandchildren, of rivers back home and the duty to protect what could not protect itself. The Brazilian spoke of injustice, of imbalance, of rainforests and mining, and what it meant to grow up in a world where progress always seemed to come at a price someone else had to pay. The German lawyer, initially stoic, revealed that his own brother had died in a factory collapse tied to environmental negligence. He did not cry. He did not need to. And finally, the Chinese delegate stood. He said nothing for 10 seconds, then simply, "Silence is not absence. It is weight. It is pain. It is warning." And then he sat down. No one spoke. Alex, eyes wet but steady, stood and turned to the room and began. He didn't just translate their words. He rebreathed them. He told the story of a collective ache, 5 perspectives converging in different languages, yet circling the same wound: fear, legacy, responsibility, and hope. He spoke with the reverence of a poet and the clarity of a diplomat. His voice carried the tempo of restraint and the rhythm of understanding. When he finished, no one clapped. They didn't need to. It was the kind of silence you didn't dare break, the kind that said, this is what we came for. Later that evening, the delegations signed a provisional accord. It wasn't final. But it was more than anyone had expected. Marcus stepped out onto the balcony, hands in his coat pockets, the city glowing beneath him. Alex followed quietly, uncertain if he was allowed. Marcus didn't look at him. He just said, "I've been in this business 27 years. Never seen a room go silent like that." Alex said nothing. Then Marcus turned. "You ever think about doing this for real?" Alex blinked. "Sir?" "Not delivery. Not just interpreting. I mean this. Diplomacy. Policy. Bridging worlds. Standing in the space between people who think they'll never understand each other and proving them wrong." Alex swallowed. "I did. Once." Marcus studied him. "What happened?" Alex looked down at his shoes. "Life." A beat. Then Marcus said, "Well, life just gave you another shot." He pulled a card from his coat. "Come see me next week. There's a place for you at this table, if you want it." Alex took the card, looked at it, then at the skyline, and for the first time in years he didn't feel like a boy standing outside the window of the world. He felt like someone who might just belong at the center of it. The elevator to the 67th floor of Hartwell International moved like a breath held too long. Alex stood in the center, back straight, hands fidgeting with the cuffs of the tailored blazer Marcus had insisted he borrow. The red hoodie was gone, for now. So were the sneakers. In their place, black dress shoes and a borrowed sense of belonging. He had spent the weekend re-watching diplomatic summits on YouTube. He devoured reports, practiced phrasing, studied trade law basics, cultural nuances, and negotiation theory until sunrise. But knowledge was a thin shield when you didn't believe you deserved the room. The elevator chimed. He stepped out into a war zone disguised as a boardroom. A long table of polished oak stretched toward a wall of glass. Beyond it, Manhattan shimmered like a promise. But inside the room, the atmosphere was brittle. 10 executives from 6 countries sat in tense silence. No eye contact, no movement, just strained, formal posture, the body language of people who had already given up pretending to like each other. Marcus Weller stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on a stack of papers, the other motioning Alex forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this is Alex Carter. He'll be assisting us as a neutral interpreter and cultural liaison." There was a moment's pause. Then came the low voice of Eric Clausen, German-born CEO of a European energy firm. "He looks young." Alex smiled. "I am. But words don't age, Mr. Clausen, and neither does trust." The room didn't laugh, but a few eyebrows lifted. Marcus nodded at Alex. "Take your seat." "No." The meeting began with numbers, carbon offsets, royalties, licensing fees, software rights. Alex translated every word across 5 languages, clean, precise, surgical. But he also began to notice things, small things. When the French executive frowned at a specific phrasing in English, Alex subtly softened the term into one with cultural resonance. When the Chinese delegate leaned back too far, arms crossed, chin tilted, it wasn't boredom. It was a calculated silence, a form of resistance. When the Brazilian investor smiled during a tense point, it wasn't friendliness. It was warning, cloaked in charm. Alex didn't just sit between languages. He sat between intentions. And it was exhausting. During a short break, Marcus pulled Alex aside to the hallway. "You're doing fine." Alex leaned against the wall. "They hate each other." "They don't hate each other," Marcus said. "They hate losing. They hate vulnerability. And most of all, they hate not being understood." Alex exhaled. "Then I need more than translation. I need psychology, diplomacy, maybe a miracle." Marcus smirked. "That's why you're here. You don't just speak languages, you read silence." He clapped Alex on the shoulder. "Get back in there. You're holding more than words together." Back inside, things escalated. Eric Clausen accused Hartwell of using linguistic fog to hide transfer of ownership clauses. The French rep retaliated by threatening to walk out. The Japanese delegate spoke softly, but his words, when translated, landed like knives. The Chinese negotiator stared silently, lips pursed, as if he were watching the entire house of cards fall apart in real time. And then the Brazilian minister, who had remained quiet for most of the meeting, leaned forward and dropped a bomb. "If this deal fractures, we take our battery tech to China, exclusively." The room erupted. Chairs shifted. Papers slapped the table. Voices overlapped in 5 different accents. Alex stood motionless in the center, heart pounding, throat dry, panic circling like sharks. And then he raised one hand. Not loud, not commanding, just present. The room stilled, slowly, uneasily. "I'm going to say something," Alex said, voice even. "Not as your interpreter, but as someone sitting between your worlds." They waited. What's happening right now isn't about language. It's about fear. Fear that someone will win more. Fear that someone will take advantage. Fear that history will repeat itself. And fear, he looked at the Brazilian minister, that what you've built won't be protected. The minister didn't argue. Alex continued, "I understand. All of you are defending your nations, your companies, your people. But if you weaponize every word, there's no bridge I can build strong enough to carry us." He paused, then said something he hadn't planned. "So I'm asking you, not as executives, but as human beings, to give me 1 hour. 1 hour where I speak for all of you. I'll take your core non-negotiables, your red lines, your truths, and I'll craft a single version of this deal that doesn't sound like 5 contracts duct-taped together." The silence returned. Not skeptical this time. Curious. Marcus spoke first. "I trust him." The Japanese delegate gave a short nod. "We agree." The Brazilian raised his hand. 1 hour. Alex worked in the side conference room alone. He laid out 10 pages of notes, 5 legal summaries, and 30 years of mistrust on the table. He began by writing down 1 sentence from each group. Not the most powerful, not the most polished, the truest. Then, slowly, he shaped them. Not as compromises, but as convergences. He used French structure to soften direct English phrasing. He blended Chinese strategic metaphors with Brazilian urgency. He gave German logic rhythm and Japanese humility weight. He rewrote not just to clarify, but to unify. When he returned to the room an hour later, the light outside had begun to shift. Afternoon shadows stretched long across the glass. He handed each person a printed draft, 1 page, no legal jargon, just plain language, clear, resonant, shared. He read it aloud. By the end, no one clapped, but no one objected. When the meeting adjourned, Alex remained seated for a moment, staring at his now empty notebook. Riley approached. For once, her tone was gentle. "You just did what 100 lawyers couldn't." Alex closed the notebook. "I didn't win them over. I just helped them stop pushing." "Same thing," she said, then paused. "You hungry?" Alex blinked. "What?" "Come on. You've just bridged 5 nations. That earns you at least 1 overcooked office pizza." Alex smiled. For the first time that day, it wasn't a performance. It was real. As they walked out, Marcus stood in the doorway watching them. "Between words and worlds," he said quietly to himself. "That's where real power lives." And in that moment, Alex Carter wasn't a delivery boy. He wasn't a temp. He wasn't a fluke. He was the quiet center of something bigger than language. He was the bridge. The morning after the breakthrough meeting, Alex Carter stood in front of the mirror of a downtown tailor shop, still unsure who the man was staring back at him. The suit fit. That was the strange part. After a lifetime of borrowed uniforms and oversized hand-me-downs, this one actually fit. Not just the cut, but the presence it demanded. A subtle navy blue, clean lines, sharp collar. It was understated, just like him. Marcus had sent it over with a note. Monday, 9 a.m. Welcome to Hartwell. Alex had read that sentence at least 20 times. Now it lived in his chest like a new rhythm. But suits didn't make men, and no title could erase the years he'd spent walking between subway cars with cold hands and a delivery app blinking like a lifeline. He still hadn't told his mom, not fully, just said, "They offered me a contract job, helping with international stuff." He didn't want to raise her hopes until the ink was dry, until he believed it. At 8:59 a.m., Alex stepped into Hartwell International, this time through the main entrance. Not the loading dock, not the service elevator. The glass doors parted for him like they knew his name. The security guard who used to wave him off now greeted him with a nod and a printed badge. Alex Carter, Strategic Linguistic Consultant. Riley met him in the elevator. She looked him up and down, surprised, maybe even impressed. "No hoodie?" she said. "Maybe next week," Alex replied. They both smiled. When the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, it wasn't a chaos this time, but quiet authority. Leather chairs, skyline views, the soft hum of ambition. Riley led him to a glass-walled office. Not huge, but with his name on the door. Alex Carter. That still didn't feel real. But what was waiting on the desk was even more surreal. A thick folder. No name on the tab, just one handwritten word. Candidate. Riley placed a coffee cup beside it. "Marcus wants you to review this before the afternoon session." "What is it?" Alex asked. "An applicant," she said. "We're opening a position, multilingual advisor. The guy's resume came through internal channels. Marcus wants your take before we invite him in." Alex opened the file casually, and then froze. His breath caught. His hands stilled. Because on the first page of that resume was his own name. But not the version he had handed over. Not the abbreviated CV he'd cobbled together in a public library after dropping out of NYU. Not the simplified summary he'd emailed Marcus's assistant last week. No, this was something else. This was everything. A full academic profile, linguistic research papers, volunteer work at refugee centers, a summer internship proposal for the UN that he never submitted because he couldn't afford the travel. Copies of glowing recommendations from professors, mentors, even a high school teacher who once called him the voice that could build bridges in a burning world. Alex kept flipping pages, page after page of who he had been before life taught him to shrink. At the back, tucked behind a printed NYU transcript, was a short, handwritten note in Marcus Weller's handwriting. "Sometimes the world needs reminding of what someone was born to do." Alex blinked hard. The walls of the glass office blurred. He hadn't said yes to any of this. Not fully. Not yet. But now, someone had handed him his own story and dared him to believe in it again. At 3 p.m., he entered the small conference room for his onboarding interview. But to his surprise, he wasn't the one being interviewed. Marcus was already seated, flipping through another folder, relaxed but razor-focused. "I asked you here to talk about your future," Marcus said. Alex sat down slowly. "Is this formal?" "No," Marcus said, "but it is real." He set the folder down. "I don't want you as a contractor. I want you in-house, full-time, strategic liaison, cross-cultural negotiations, executive advisory. You'll help me build a department that doesn't exist yet, because until you walked through that door, I didn't know it could. Alex blinked. I didn't even finish college. I know, Marcus said. I read your file. I also read your draft of the joint climate statement. You know what I saw? Alex didn't answer. I saw someone who didn't just translate what people were saying, but what they meant to say, and couldn't. He leaned forward. Degrees matter, but not more than clarity, or empathy, or instinct. Alex looked down. It's a big leap. You're already airborne, Marcus said. You just haven't looked down yet. A long silence followed. Then Alex asked, almost reluctantly, Why me? Marcus sat back. The question seemed to hit deeper than expected. My father was a linguist, he said finally. Fluent in 6 languages, worked in peacekeeping. He used to tell me the most dangerous thing in any negotiation isn't bad intentions, it's mistranslation of silence. He looked out the window. I've built billion-dollar partnerships, acquired companies, crossed continents, closed deals in 3 currencies. But the most meaningful moment I've had in this building was watching you make a room full of enemies sit in stillness, not because you had power, but because you gave it to them. He turned back to Alex. So, what do you say? Alex didn't answer right away. He left the building, walked 24 blocks uptown, past the bookstore where he used to study between shifts, past the coffee shop where he once tutored a 12-year-old in French just to afford groceries, past NYU's South Gate, where a young version of himself once believed the world would open just because he had potential. He stood at Washington Square Park for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and dialed his mom. Ma? He said quietly. Her voice was tired but warm. Hey, baby. I think I just got offered the kind of job I used to dream about. A pause, then, is it the kind where you wear a suit and use your gift? He smiled. Yeah, that kind. Then what are you waiting for? She whispered. That night, Alex emailed Marcus one sentence. I'm ready. And as the city turned to midnight, he closed the folder labeled Candidate and opened a new one with his own name printed bold at the top. Not as a maybe, not as a ghost of what could have been, but as someone chosen. By the time Alex Carter stepped into the United Nations Annex building in Midtown Manhattan, the rain had already soaked through the cuffs of his sleeves. He barely noticed. The Hartwell team moved like a military unit, briefcases snapping shut, translators reviewing technical specs, legal aides whispering updates through wireless earpieces. Cameras flashed as international media lined the entrance. Flags from 23 countries fluttered above the atrium like quiet reminders. This wasn't a meeting. This was history. And Alex was no longer the outsider watching through glass. He was seated at the table, literally. He adjusted his tie, not out of nerves, but ritual. His mother had ironed it that morning, even though she could barely stand without help. You'll speak for people who don't have microphones, she'd said, so make every word carry. Now Marcus Weller stood at the far end of the corridor, arms crossed, nodding once as their eyes met. He didn't need to say anything. The look said it all. Time to earn the suit. The chamber was vast, circular, and cold. A semicircle of seats flanked a central panel. Delegations from 6 continents gathered in structured silence. In front of each, country placards, e-ink tablets, glasses of still water, and folders containing the draft Alex had helped craft, a revolutionary joint energy compact that promised clean fuel tech transfer across borders. Alex sat beside Marcus, acting as chief cultural liaison, not just translating but monitoring reactions, unspoken shifts, coded resistance. On his right was Anika Thorne, lead counsel for Hartwell's international strategy. On his left sat a quiet, wiry man with thin glasses, Mr. Hideo Yamazaki, a senior advisor from Japan's Ministry of Environmental Transition. The draft was balanced. The stakes were not. 30 minutes in, things began to crack. The Indian delegation objected to carbon offset ratios. A German tech firm pushed for patent exclusivity. A West African coalition raised alarms over legacy debt clauses. Alex translated each concern in real time, framing them diplomatically. But beneath the words, he could feel it. Slippage. Not from language, but ego, fear, politics. This wasn't about who was right. This was about who would blink first. Marcus leaned toward him. "We're losing France and Japan," he murmured. Alex scanned the room. The French delegate, a woman in her 50s with a steel-gray bun, sat rigid, fingers clasped so tight her knuckles were white. The Japanese official beside her scribbled notes, lips pressed into a thin line. Alex knew that posture. It wasn't anger, it was calculation. He tapped Marcus's tablet. "Give me 5 minutes. Alone." Marcus frowned. "What are you doing?" "What you hired me to do." Five minutes later, Alex stood in a side chamber, flanked by Madame Duval of France and Mr. Yamazaki. There were no aides, no microphones, no pages, just 3 people who had stopped pretending. "Why now?" Madame Duval said bluntly. "Why is Hartwell so eager to give away its clean fuel infrastructure?" Alex met her gaze. "Because clean air isn't a luxury anymore. It's a deadline." Mr. Yamazaki interjected softly. "Deadlines come with costs, and your proposal expects Japan to trust that a U.S. corporation will not privatize grid access after year 5. Alex paused, then said what no executive in the building would say. "You're right." They looked at him. "You're both right. The language sounds generous, but you've been burned before by treaties that promised equity and delivered control." He turned to Madame Duval. "Your grandfather's factory shut down in 1973 after a similar deal. I read your memoir. You saw the cost of diplomacy that wasn't honest." Her eyes narrowed. "You read my book?" Alex nodded. "In 3 languages. A flicker of something passed over her face. Surprise. Maybe even respect. Mr. Yamazaki spoke next. "Then tell me, what do you believe in? Hartwell, Marcus, or your own voice?" Alex took a breath. "My father taught English to refugees. My mother cleaned houses to keep the lights on. I grew up learning to listen to people who weren't given podiums. And right now, I'm telling you, I believe this deal isn't perfect. But it's the best chance we've had in a generation." He stepped forward. "So let me rewrite the amendment, myself, with you both, in this room, line by line. No assistants, no titles, just 3 people who remember what's at stake." They said nothing for a long time. Then slowly Madame Duval pulled out a pen. When they re-entered the chamber 90 minutes later, the document had changed. The wording was more cautious, but more human. Clause 7 now included legacy impact protections for post-colonial regions. Clause 11 guaranteed an independent oversight council made up of non-Western scientists. Clause 14, a new addition, created a multilingual grievance process for indigenous communities. Alex stood beside Marcus as the changes were read aloud. This time, no one interrupted. Not because they were thrilled, but because, for once, they understood each other. Later that evening, as the chamber emptied and news outlets buzzed with headlines, Marcus approached Alex on the terrace overlooking the East River. "Do you know what you just did?" he asked. Alex shook his head. "Got lucky?" Marcus smiled. "You made legacy negotiators rewrite their playbooks. You made two of the toughest delegates in the world sit down and collaborate without threatening each other. You didn't just save the deal." He paused. "You gave it a soul." Alex looked down at his hands. "They asked me if I believed in you," he said. "I couldn't answer with words, so I answered with work." Marcus clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You just delivered the deal of a lifetime. But this is just chapter 1. That night, back in his apartment, Alex didn't go straight to bed. He pulled out the first notebook he'd used at NYU, the one with wrinkled corners and ink smudges. He flipped to the back, where he'd scribbled dream jobs as a teenager: UN interpreter, cultural envoy, writer, professor. At the very bottom, underlined twice, "Help the world understand itself." He smiled. Then, softly, almost like a prayer, he wrote a new line beneath it. "Today, I started." The article dropped at 6:04 a.m. Alex Carter was still asleep, curled up on the worn sofa in his apartment in Queens, when the world began whispering his name. It started with a headline: "The Boy Who Spoke for the World." New York Times International. Then came the subhead: "How a 20-year-old former delivery worker bridged 5 continents, rewrote the terms of global clean energy, and reminded the world what listening can do." By 7:12 a.m., his phone had 26 missed calls. By 7:45 a.m., his inbox had over 300 messages, press inquiries, podcast invites, scholarships offered retroactively, even a handwritten letter scanned from a language professor in Cairo who simply wrote, "You gave voice to the silence I've taught for 40 years. And yet, when Alex opened his eyes, all he saw was the ceiling of his mother's apartment, still water-stained in the corners. The air smelled faintly of menthol and toasted bread. He didn't feel famous. He felt tired, until he saw his mother standing in the kitchen doorway holding her phone. Her hand trembled slightly. "You're in the Times," she whispered. Alex blinked. "I am?" She turned the screen toward him. He read the headline, then the photo. It was a still frame from the treaty signing ceremony. He hadn't noticed the photographer. In it, he was standing between 2 officials, one from Japan, one from Brazil, his eyes focused, one hand slightly raised in mid-gesture. But it was the caption that broke him. "Alex Carter, 20, interprets silence into understanding." The story spread fast. Within hours, Hartwell's stock jumped 8%. Not because of the deal alone, but because of the story behind it. CNN called him a quiet revolutionary. BBC tagged him the diplomat without a degree. Social media did what social media does, dug up everything: his old chess club photos, his abandoned academic blog on linguistic symmetry. Even a video from 3 years ago of him tutoring immigrant kids under a Queen's Park gazebo. That one went viral. In it, Alex was teaching an 8-year-old girl how to say "I believe in myself" in 6 languages. The child kept giggling after each attempt, and Alex's laughter had been warm and full and unguarded. That moment, simple, human, traveled farther than any headline. Toll. Hartwell's office changed overnight. Alex now had a nameplate outside his door. He also had a small team, 2 young interns, 1 former translator, and a rotating legal advisor. They called themselves the Cultural Compass Division. Riley insisted on the name, and to everyone's surprise, it stuck. Reporters showed up at the building lobby daily. Marcus Weller, known for being allergic to media, granted exactly 1 interview. When asked what made him trust a 20-year-old dropout with a $500 million negotiation, he replied, "Because for the first time in a decade, I wasn't the smartest person in the room. I was the one who needed translation." But the moment that shook Alex most came on a rainy Thursday, in the most unexpected way. He had just wrapped a meeting on multilingual licensing frameworks when the security desk called his office. "There's a student here," they said. "She says she's not leaving until she speaks with Mr. Carter." Alex headed down. There in the marble lobby stood a girl, no more than 12. She wore a public school uniform and carried a blue plastic folder tucked under her arm. Her hair was braided tightly, her shoes still damp from the rain. She didn't flinch when she saw him. "Are you Mr. Carter?" "I am," he said gently. "My teacher read your story in class," she said. "I wrote you something." She handed him the folder. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper. In shaky pencil it read, "Dear Mr. Carter, I want to speak 7 languages too, but mostly, I want to be heard. Thank you for proving people like me can be." No one spoke for a moment. Then Alex crouched down, level with her. "You already are," he said. "Now let's make sure the world hears you loud and clear." He handed her his Hartwell badge lanyard. "Come visit next week. I'll show you how the microphones work." She didn't smile. She beamed. That night, Alex stood on his apartment balcony, watching the city breathe. The buildings no longer looked so tall. The traffic below didn't feel so far away. He felt something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Not pride, not success. Belonging. And yet, there was weight too. Because now, people were listening. And that meant he had to be careful about what came next. Words could move worlds, but they could also build walls if misused. And Alex Carter had no intention of becoming someone who only sounded like he cared. He wanted his work to keep speaking, even when he wasn't in the room. The next morning, Riley found him reviewing documents in his office, headphones on, eyes tired but focused. "You've got a fan club in the lobby," she said. 3 international students, 2 diplomats' sons, and 1 very stubborn girl from Queens with a binder full of dream speeches. Alex smiled without looking up. "Let them in. But tell them first rule of translation. Listen before you speak?" He looked up. "Exactly." Riley sat across from him. "They're asking when you're going to write a book." "I haven't earned that yet." She tilted her head. "You already wrote something better." "What?" She pointed to the window. "The pause between voices. The silence people trust now." The room wasn't designed for someone like Alex Carter. It was quiet, not with silence, but with the kind of stillness only old money and global power could buy. The table was a single slab of dark walnut, cut from a tree that had stood longer than some countries. The walls were hung with abstract art, strategic, expensive, and intentionally non-controversial. Every seat was custom leather. Every voice had weight. And now one of those seats had his name on it. A placard. Alex Carter, Cultural Strategist, Hartwell International. Alex stared at it for a long moment before sitting. 12 chairs circled the table, representing the Global Technology Equity Consortium, a body that advised both the UN and the World Trade Council. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a summit of influence. Only select corporate heads, cabinet-level advisors, and strategic thinkers were ever invited here. He was 21 days into his full-time role. He had been invited to observe, but no one at that table had ever been truly passive, and Alex was learning fast that influence didn't wait for permission. The session began. A proposal to implement multilingual AI policy frameworks in underrepresented regions was met with polite skepticism. A European delegate questioned the feasibility of training without existing infrastructure. A U.S. trade advisor warned of potential strategic leakage if code became decentralized. A South African development official spoke of linguistic justice, only to be drowned out by acronyms. Alex watched it all happen. 12 voices, but only 5 were truly being heard. He shifted in his seat, then tapped his pen once, lightly on his notepad. Marcus Weller noticed. "You have a thought, Carter?" he asked. The room turned to him, faces polite but unreadable. Alex took a breath, then stood, not out of ego, but to be level with every eye in the room. "With respect," he began, "you're all speaking as if the question is whether we can build global language equity systems." He looked around. But no one's asking who gets to define what equity sounds like. A pause. "You're designing tools for communities that weren't invited to this table. That's not strategy. It's theater." A murmur passed through the room. Then, "And what do you propose, Mr. Carter?" asked the advisor from Geneva, lips thin. Alex answered without blinking. "Reverse translation protocol. Before rollout, every policy must be reviewed by native speakers, not translators, but actual community voices. Their feedback is required for implementation. Their approval, not yours, determines clarity." "You're suggesting a veto from the field?" someone said sharply. "I'm suggesting respect," Alex replied. "Not as a formality, as a foundation." Marcus smiled faintly, not indulgent, proud. The Geneva advisor stared at Alex for a long moment, then said, "Noted," which, in that room, meant, "We'll do it." After the session, Marcus found him alone by the espresso machine. "You know what you just did?" he asked. Alex sipped slowly. "Told the truth." Marcus chuckled. "No. You reminded them what the world outside this table looks like. Most of these people haven't been spoken to like that in years." "I didn't speak to them," Alex said. "I spoke for the people who weren't in the room. That's why I brought you here." He handed Alex a slim folder. "What's this?" "A request." Inside was a proposal, an invitation for Alex to join an intergovernmental roundtable, permanently. A rotating cultural envoy seat, the youngest appointee in UN-affiliated history. 6-month terms, real votes, a real seat at the global table. Alex stared at the document, then looked up. "I'm not a politician." "You're something rarer," Marcus said. "You're credible, because you haven't forgotten who you were before they gave you a chair." That night, Alex rode the Q train home in silence, fingers tracing the edges of the folder. The subway lights flickered past like fragments of memory. A little girl who once handed him a letter in the lobby. His mother clipping news stories and taping them to the fridge. The smell of rain in Queens. He thought of the boys he used to see sleeping on the 7 train with backpacks as pillows, their dreams paused by bills and silence. He thought of a Senegalese janitor he once worked with who spoke 5 languages fluently, but no one ever asked him a question beyond, "Where's the mop closet?" These people, they weren't statistics. They were fluent in struggle, and none of them had seats at tables. Yet, Alex didn't sign the document the next day. Instead, he called a meeting. In his office sat 4 people, a professor from NYU who once wrote him a recommendation letter he never submitted, a single mother from East Harlem who ran a neighborhood language exchange, a deaf rights activist, and an 11-year-old girl named Marisol, who was writing her first speech, in 4 languages. Alex set the document on the table. "I've been offered a seat," he said. "Then take it," the professor said. "I will, but not alone." They looked at him. "I want to build something. A pipeline. Not of power, but of presence. I want to create a program that finds the unheard and teaches them to speak in any room." He pointed to the NYU professor. "We'll need scholarships." To the activist, accessibility protocols beyond just compliance. To the mother, grassroots partnerships. And to Marisol, "You'll help me build the youth council. You'll be our first chair." The girl blinked, then nodded, slowly, fiercely. The following week, Alex walked into the United Nations Cultural Hall. He wore no tie, just a red pin on his lapel, a quiet nod to the hoodie that started it all. When he stepped onto the circular platform to deliver his opening statement, he paused, looked out across a room filled with flags, and said, "My name is Alex Carter. I was never supposed to be here. I didn't come through the traditional gates. I came through side doors, service elevators, and open windows. I came here speaking 7 languages, but more importantly, I came here listening. Today, I sit in this seat not to speak for the world, but to make sure it hears itself." And for the second time in his life, the room went silent, but not because he didn't belong, because now he did. 1 month after he took his seat at the United Nations, Alex Carter returned to where it all began, with a paper bag in one hand and no cameras waiting. The Queens neighborhood hadn't changed. The sidewalks were still cracked, pigeons still battled for breadcrumbs, and the corner bodega still sold dollar coffee that tasted like burnt hope. But something was different. Him. He walked past the stoop where he once sat after long delivery shifts, translating voices in his head just to stay sharp. Past the park where he'd first tutored refugee kids under a busted gazebo. Past the apartment complex that still held his mother's scent in its faded halls. It was a Sunday morning, and he wasn't there to make speeches. He was there to listen. In the community library's basement, a quiet buzz filled the air. The room was small, with folding chairs and string lights wrapped around exposed pipes. A hand-painted banner read, "Voices Without Borders, Youth Language Circle." And at the front stood Marisol, now proudly 11 and holding a clipboard like it was a microphone. Her braids swung as she called out names. "Lena, Mandarin, Carlos, Spanish, Jamal, ASL, Ava, Vietnamese." Kids between the ages of 8 and 14 took turns translating phrases to each other, laughing, stumbling, encouraging one another with hand signs and nods. There was no pressure, no grading system, just sound and soul. When Marisol spotted Alex at the back, she lit up and waved. He waved back, then sat beside a mother wearing a "First Time Here" sticker. "That your daughter up there?" he asked. "She begged to come," the woman whispered. "Said she wanted to learn how to hear people better. I thought it was a speech thing." Alex smiled. "It is, but not the kind you're thinking." After the session, Marisol ran up to him holding a laminated sign. "I made these," she said proudly. "They say you matter in 10 languages." Alex took one and read it slowly. English, Spanish, Arabic, Swahili, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Hindi, French, ASL finger signs, and a blank space at the bottom. "What's this one for?" he asked. "That's for the next language I haven't learned yet," she grinned. He chuckled, then knelt to her level. "You know, someone once told me that the most powerful language is the one that makes people feel seen." Marisol nodded. "That's the one I want to speak. You already are." Later that evening, Alex walked to his mother's building and let himself in quietly. She was in her armchair, wrapped in her favorite yellow blanket, watching the evening news with the volume low. He kissed her cheek. "Guess what?" he whispered. She didn't open her eyes, just smiled. "You learned a new word?" He chuckled. "Close. I saw someone else speak one I never knew I taught." She opened one eye. "Proud of you, baby." He sat beside her, handed her the laminated card. She read it with tired eyes. When she reached the blank space, she looked at him. "You know what that last one should say?" she whispered. "What?" She reached for his hand. "Love. That's the only language they never teach in school. But it's the only one everybody needs to hear." The following week, Alex stood in front of a classroom at NYU, not as a student, but as a guest lecturer. The room was full, not because of his title, but because he was living proof of what no syllabus could predict, that sometimes the best bridge is not the most eloquent, but the most honest. He didn't teach grammar. He taught presence. He spoke of dialects of dignity, the accent of empathy, the weight of pause, the melody in hearing someone say, "I'm tired," and understanding it as, "Please see me." And at the end of class, a student raised their hand. "Mr. Carter, if language can unite people, why does the world still feel so divided?" Alex looked out the window for a moment. The sun was setting, casting orange over the skyline. Then he answered softly, "Because we keep teaching people how to talk, but we don't teach them how to listen with their hearts." Months passed. Alex continued his work at Hartwell and the UN, but his most cherished hours were spent in libraries, shelters, and school basements, helping children find their voices, not in textbooks, but in laughter, movement, and shared meals. He launched a program called Lingua Nova, focused on training youth from underserved communities in language advocacy. The goal wasn't to create translators, it was to build ambassadors of empathy. And on the anniversary of the Climate Accord, when a journalist asked, "What do you consider your legacy so far?" Alex didn't mention the deals or the summit or the historic votes. He simply said, "A little girl gave me a paper once. It said, 'I want to be heard.' My job is to make sure she always is." On the final page of the journal he kept since NYU, Alex wrote a sentence in 7 languages, and then in English. "The heart doesn't speak in dialects. It speaks in presence. And when you truly hear someone, you both become fluent in something sacred." He closed the book and began the next one.